Welcome, Kamran. Welcome, Dakin. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome, everyone, to In Conversation. Today, we're located in Liljestrand House, Hawaii, and honored to have Dakin Hart, Senior Curator at the Isamu Noguchi Foundation and Garden Museum, speak with contemporary artist Kamran Samimi about the ways in which his work addresses the significance of place, environment, and the intersections of local and regional influences in his creative practice. This program is part of re.flect, an exhibition series that offers in-depth access into re.riddle's global community of artists. This month, we're thrilled to present NatureNature, a solo exhibition by Kamran Samimi, which is a meditation on the poetics of nature explored through the gesture of repetition. Through the careful manipulation of line, form, and light, Samimi considers how spatial intervals, recurrence, and seriality serve as salient points to contemplate the notions of temporality and persistence, physicality and immateriality, and their dialectical tensions. This exhibition is presented in San Francisco in collaboration with Hugomento. To learn more about the exhibition, please visit re.riddle.com. So let's meet our speakers today. Dakin Hart has been Senior Curator at the Isamu Noguchi Foundation and Garden Museum since 2013. He oversees the museum's exhibitions, collections, catalog raisonné, archives, and public programming, and has a daily good fortune of collaborating with Isamu Noguchi in absentia. His previous positions include Assistant Director at the National Sculpture Center in Dallas, Assistant Director and Director of Artists in Residence at Montalvo Center for the Arts, where he served on the Board of Trustees before joining the staff, and Assistant to Director of the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. He was a founding member of the Art Museum Image Consortium and the Museums of the Web Program Committee. Hart has served as a member of the Board of Trustees of Alliance of Artists Communities. He has also worked as an independent curator and writer. Drawing from inspiration from a range of sources and cultures, Kamran Samimi's multimedia practice blurs the boundaries between form, matter, and the immaterial. Samimi's work deals with the concepts of place, time, impermanence, and the notion of coming into being. Often referencing the phenomena of nature, Samimi attempts to bridge the natural world with the metaphysical via a meditative response employing abstract marks and gestures. Kamran Samimi grew up in the rural Lapohohoi on the Big Island of Hawaii to parents of Iranian and Norwegian ancestry. He has had solo exhibitions at the Sharjah Art Museum in the United Arab Emirates, Honolulu Museum of Art, Shangri-La Museum of Islamic Art, Culture, and Design, and has exhibited at the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Tokyo Midtown, Japan. Samimi holds a BFA in printmaking and an MFA in print media and sculpture from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dakin and Kamran. I'll let you both take it from here.
Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's a real pleasure to be here with you, Dakin, and in such a beautiful place. Wonderful day here.
It is really hard to set the scene for people who are not with us, but we are in a remarkable spot up high on the hill with a 270-degree view of Oahu. It is really hard to explain. But actually, I mean, that's a good place to start, because you and I probably are a lot more interested in, well, like the physical geography and geology of Hawaii than, well, maybe many of our visitors or our viewers are as well. But why is Hawaii here? Like, what made Hawaii?
Well, on a geological level, literally, as you know, and many of us know, there's a storm at the center of the earth, and it's this magma, molten, tempest. And so that magma is pressed and pushed and moves through the surface, and there's a thin crust around that, that molten shell. And that's basically where everything we know exists on. It's just this thin layer, and that's the continents and the islands. And I mean, I wish you all could see like this view here. But so as you know, I grew up on the Big Island, and you've been to the Big Island several times, right?
Yeah.
And it hosts an active volcano, and growing up there, we visited many times. And so I think connecting the way in which that island is so visibly alive has really informed and kind of made its way into my art practice, but also, going back to the idea of this ball of earth in space with a storm raging inside of it. And that storm is responsible for everything that we know. And so it's like this violence which leads to creation. And I think ultimately the things that we find to be beautiful. And so connecting to my practice as an artist, I think that in many ways, I'm also a container for all of this stuff inside of me. And it often feels like turbulence, it's past traumas, and it's people and places that I've loved and lived, and, things that I've found beautiful, moments of joy, moments of grief. And art is my way of kind of making sense of those feelings and thoughts and expressing them and processing them. And so we can kind of go to the first slide here. On that sort of elemental note, this pair of paintings here, they're called Of Stone and Sea. And this is a photo from my residency in 2020, I think, at the Shangri-La Museum of Islamic Art, Culture, and Design. And this pair of paintings are sort of one of the ways in which I channel my experience living and being and existing in this place that is so, as I said, visibly alive, and full of signs in which, well, I'll talk a little bit about the work. There are two kind of components. There's the bottom layer of the paintings, and I wish we could see them in person, but it's very textured and layered, and it's produced by pressing and scraping layers of cement onto the surface of the canvas.
Like with a palette knife? Or...
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of slow, methodical. For me, it's very stone-like, structured and kind of solemn, dense, heavy, repetitive. And then once that layer of cement kind of dries and cures, then I put them upright. I work horizontally as if I'm building a house. And then I put them upright and I pour ink and paint, and I mix powdered marble and basalt into my paints. And so that's part of the ink and the paint layer too. And as I was doing that, I was drinking coffee, and I poured some coffee on there too. And so it's this sort of amalgamation of water, liquids. And that, as you see in the picture, flows over the surface. And so the stone is heavy and dense and structured and layered. And the water is, follows the path of least resistance, or makes its own path, or merges with other pools of liquid on the surface. And so as I'm working on these paintings, I'm thinking about the ways in which I am also a combination of mineral and water. And we all are. I mean, our actual bodies are not so dissimilar from the world that we live on a physical level. And of course, I also believe there's something else that's that consciousness that's also there in me, and those past experiences and memories and emotions that sort of guide my hand, guide my marks. But
it's interesting, your process here isn't that different from the geological processes, because one of the things about living in a place like Hawaii, we tend to stereotype geologic time as being about the past, right? Because we're trying to understand the 13.5 billion years of the existence of our universe. We want to understand the 3.5 billion year existence of our planet as a rock. But here, the Earth is being made all the time. Mm-hmm. It's in a constant process of becoming. You have the opportunity to work with rock that's younger than you are. And usually, someone like Noguchi thought about stone as what he said, the congealment of time, this idea that you have an enormous amount of layering of time built into the rocks. And many different things have happened to them. They've moved long distances. They've undergone many different shaping processes. But here, it's so direct. It's much more on the surface. The surface is being made. Mm-hmm. So it just seems interesting that there's such a close correlation between the way that you're working and the way that the island is being made. Somehow it's much more consonant. It's much more easy to access in a way. And that seems incredibly important to you, that you are very process oriented.
Yeah. I like what you kind of said there. The earth, especially here, but all over the earth, it's so visibly in the process of becoming, and it's constantly becoming, transitioning, moving through time and changing. And so growing up here and living here and observing this place, for me, it's so obvious the many ways in which I'm also in the process of becoming. My body is changing and my mind is changing, and as I experience and move through life. And so I can't help but feel that connection to everything around me. It's like, well, we're all changing together. And that's the nature of this universe, is that constant change. And as far as time, that, beautifully said, congealments of time. I do have the unique chance to work with stone, like you said, that's younger than I am, which is so unusual. But I don't. The short answer is it doesn't feel right to work with stone that's that new. It hasn't lived long enough yet for me to change it. Other hands need to shape it before I can shape it. And so I'll let the rain and the wind and other stones, form it still. And so I don't use such new stone. The stone I use, and those stones are also all on the Big Island, around the lava flow.
Yeah.
And so I use stones from Oahu, but also from the Big Island too, where I grew up, and
that are relatively ancient.
Yeah, I mean, relative is
yeah.
exactly, 10,000 years or less than 1 million years.
Right.
And what we have here in Hawaii is basalt, primarily. And there's other minerals as well, but we don't have marble or granite. The island is too recent. So here we can see some prints that it's a body of work I've been working on for 7 or 8 years, printing pieces of basalt stone. And so in addition to the sculptures that I create, like, we're looking at that screen right now, so I'll show that later. In addition to my sculpture, I do prints as well. And thinking about the idea that, these things, stone and us and the trees and everything is constantly changing and growing. These prints are created by inking up a sheet of basalt stone and running it through a printing press. And it's a traditional press, and the press drum actually cracks the stone as it's run through. And so each time it's printed, it cracks further. And so these fissures are created because of that process. And to me, that's the most beautiful thing about the prints is, ironically, it's the fact that it's being destroyed as the print is being created, which is not so dissimilar from the way that nature works, creation and destruction, which I think Noguchi's work, a lot of it was about that tension. His, what did he say? Through violence, he creates something new by attacking the stone. I'm sure you know the quote.
I do, but he had such a funny thing about rock, because you take a piece of stone and then you work it, and a lot of the time you make mistakes. You go too far, you do too much, you do something wrong, and now you've taken a rock and you've made it into a stone, like it's semi-processed, but it's not where you wanted it to be, or it's not where you hoped it would be. But Noguchi developed this way of thinking about it, is if you just leave it long enough, it'll go back to being a rock. You just have to forget what you did to mess it up and turn it into a failed thing, and just let it go back to being a rock. And then you can come at it afresh, because it's always, in its own mind, it's always a rock,
right?
And you just start wherever it is, that it's about shifting our awareness of it, or our consciousness of it as a thing. It's not, that's why he liked all the marks that were on the stones that he worked with.
Right.
You've, as part of Ascendance upstairs, you have some nice slabs of things that that have the signs of their own mechanical breaking.
Yeah.
You know, they've been industrially processed to some state, and then you just pick them up and move them somewhere else,
Right.
as opposed to trying to completely transform them.
Yeah. No, it's the tool marks, but it's also the material's own marks, the ways that it breaks and the ways that it bends or gets molded according to its history and its life. And
well, let's talk about that piece, because I think this is such an interesting issue, is like explain what does it mean, because this is a very good Noguchi subject. Noguchi had immense respect for nature, but it was in an incredibly competitive way. It was like the way that you respect somebody who wants to kill you, you know, but has like the same level of skill that you do. So it's a fair fight. That's what he was always trying to get. He was always gearing up to be capable of taking nature on her own terms. So I'm just curious how you think about cutting into the stone, you know, altering it so substantially, and that being a way to you know, commune with it in kind of a respectful way on a fundamental level.
Yeah. I remember the quote I was kind of looking for. It was, I attacked the stone, not to tame the stone, but to awaken myself, or something like that, right? And that's that competition, but also it's a connection, it's a experience of nature. It's kind of, in a way, it's emerging with it. And as I personally,
may just explain the process by which this is.
So the first few stones that I cut, I measured. I was like, I'm going to cut it every inch, you know, and I did that, and I looked at the pieces, and I felt really sad. It's like, wow, I just killed the stone, because I didn't honor it. I didn't listen to it. I did what I wanted to do as a human being, you know. And very quickly I learned that's not the way to work the stone. Instead, you hold it and you touch it and you feel it, and you let the stone guide my hand, you know. And so that's the way I do cut the stone now, is letting it inform me. And so it's a cooperation, because of course I can't completely let go. I have to be right there with each cut, you know, as it's happening. And ultimately what I do is I slice the stone and reconfigure it. It's sort of connecting to that, my belief that if we look around us in nature, everything is constantly falling apart and coming back together again. You know, that's just the nature of things. And that's literally what I'm doing with when I cut stone, is I'm cutting it apart, and then I'm reassembling or reanimating even, in a way that for me communicates the life and the history of stone as something that is alive, and it is changing and moving and growing. Even though it's ancient, it still is subject to the passage of time. And so
are these slippages original? Like, is this stacked in its original state?
It is, well, somewhat. So this stone is actually kind of round, and then by slicing it at an angle and then splaying it out, it becomes extended. So it's almost stretching the stone in this particular case. And so again, it's almost the stone ascending or merging or evaporating even, and then placed upright. This is actually a eucalyptus block of wood from right over the hill there, which is, you guys can't see, but we're surrounded by eucalyptus trees up here too. So it's a kind of pairing of these materials that are very much this place, but also ancient and universal. Stone and wood, you know, our species has always known these.
Yeah, it works everywhere.
Yeah.
Stone and wood.
Yeah.
That takes back to the beginning, because my original first thought for a question is, to what extent are you reaching for something universal consciously? You know, this circulation of magma below the Earth's surface, everything that we know and are aware of, and these enormous differences between continents and the nation states that have grown up on them and the peoples who live on them, those are our entire sphere of knowledge, you know, and they seem incredibly significant to us. But they're such a teeny slice, just such a thin veneer of the planet. You know, and I think the part of the reason why people are continuing to respond to Noguchi the way that they do is that he was sort of trying to tap into the magma of humankind too. You know, he really wanted to get at universal things that connected us. He was somebody who was very early on in the 20th century was traveling when it was hard, and was trying to draw connections between the continents and civilizations and different ways of seeing and looking at things.
And he really got around too.
He got around
all over.
Yeah.
And each place that he went, I think he picked things up and he carried them with him, right?
Including Hawaii, which we should talk about for sure.
Yeah.
Islands are so special.
Mm-hmm.
They're just especially ones that end up being the sort of nodes, you know, transit points, collecting points, where you get confluences of civilization, whether it's Cyprus or Hawaii or Great Britain or, you know, wherever it is. Hawaii is one of those places. And back in the day when Noguchi was going back and forth very early on to Asia, you had to stop somewhere, and Hawaii was one of those places where you stopped. So he ended up spending quite a lot of time here.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it suits him. I'm sure he enjoyed being here, you know.
It suits everybody.
Yeah, I guess so, right?
Like, yes.
Does it suit you too?
Yes, it suits
good.
everybody. Yeah.
Good. No, it is a really unique point on this earth, you know, this mound in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean. And
how did so many people, different people end up here? How did your parents end up here?
Well, my father's from Iran, and he traveled also around the world, lived in all kinds of places, sort of nomadic. In a sense, I think he's watching. I don't think he minds me saying that. And he met my mother in Minnesota. And then
I love you say that as if that explains why you're in Hawaii.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, of course.
But really, they wanted to get away from the blizzards and the craziness. And so they wanted to have kids, and they didn't want them to grow up in this snow world. So we moved out into the country on the Big Island. I think it was
which is as far from Minnesota as you can get, pretty much.
Totally.
And still be in the United States.
Yeah. Climate-wise, distance-wise, I mean, culturally, very remote and very beautiful, but also isolated, you know. And so it's a really wonderful, interesting place to grow up. But it also was really complicated for me. And I don't say that as a complaint, but it's just my reality, being, you know, one of the only kids with fair skin, and I really stood out physically, and also had this name that nobody can pronounce, and nobody knows where Iran is or what Persian means. And so I think in an effort to feel like I belong, I often disregarded all of that. It's sort of like my own personal history and family history, and I just wanted to belong and be at home. But I was also told my whole life living here, that, well, you'll always be an outsider. This will never be your home. You'll always be a guest here. And that was not said with hatred or anything like that. It was just sort of, that is the fact, you know. This is not the land of my ancestors. That's somewhere else. But that also was very complicated for me, because it's like, well, I've never been to Iran, never been to Norway. Is that my place? I think this is my place, but it's also not. And so that's sort of, to go back to your question about sort of the universal perspective that Noguchi knew, and many of us, it resonates with many of us around the world. If I look around the world at any given place, I don't really feel like, well, that's not really my place either. Minnesota is not my place. You know, the continental US, I don't think that's my place. But if I zoom out further still, that's my place, you know, this earth. And so the actual material that I use, stone, like this can be my place. This individual stone, this stone that I sculpt and that I touch, for the moment when I'm working on it, this can be my home, you know. And in so making work, each of those works become an extension of that home where my spirit can, you know, reside and dwell and be at peace.
Building your own island in a way.
Yeah. And other people can live there too with me. You know, it's not like this is mine and only for me. It's that this is mine, and now I hope it's for all of you too, to enjoy and to see and to touch, and, you know, and see the ways in which we're all connected. And if there's one thing, and there are many things that we have in common as a species, but if there's one thing, it's that this planet is our home, you know?
Yeah.
So
we often say, you know, Noguchi was probably the first citizen of Buckminster Fuller's Spaceship Earth, because they were friends at the time when Bucky was thinking this up. It was before we gotten into space, so nobody had ever seen the planet from space. So you had to imagine it. You know, you think of the shift in consciousness that came with that photo of the Earth from space from Apollo 8, the big blue marble.
Really?
But before that, there were only a few people who were sort of capable of understanding the planet as a marble, you know, slinging around in a void. But Bucky was one of them. And Noguchi definitely sort of absorbed that from him and was really very serious about being a citizen of the planet and trying to understand what that meant. You know, at a time when being biracial and multicultural was more harder, it was more complicated than it is now. But trying to inhabit that and make that what he was about and own it, own that in-betweenness in a way, and make it into a powerful thing, as opposed to a footnote that he had to somehow live behind or outside of or beyond.
It's not a weakness, it's a strength to know that.
And
that's what he realized, right?
If you own it honestly, I think that's the lesson now. The authority of personhood has changed so much. You know, trying to understand what it means to own your own reality in a way that's authentic and decent and connected. But that's even, in some ways it's easier, but in some ways it's harder in a place like this. In a way, everybody who's here is a traveler. You know, the Polynesians who settled Hawaii were the world's first great navigators. You know, the first great world travelers. And everybody, a lot of people who are here have come from elsewhere and have these kinds of complicated stories. The house that we're sitting in is an amazing cross-cultural story. Of different influences coming together and landing in this specific spot. You know, but the extent to which, how does it belong here, you know, is such an important question. How do you think about that? How do you think about sort of owning your own experience in a way that you can be totally comfortable with as a Hawaiian artist who's not native Hawaiian in some important ways from some points of view?
I mean, here we think of it, I'm a Hawaii-based artist. Hawaiian artists are native Hawaiian artists usually, but I mean, it is like we've talked about, it's complicated because there are so many things. And let's actually show the Ascendance sculptures. I don't know if they were shown already, but because that's
great.
That's right upstairs here at Liljestrand House. And then that last picture is the sculptures as they were created during my residency at Shangri-La. They were installed in this courtyard. And to go back real quick to connect to kind of ancestry and genealogies and this overlapping, which is I've always been very curious and questioned that in my life. You know, what am I other than just fragments of all these different places and people and memories and distant or familiar, you know? And this piece marks, or this installation marks the first time I really addressed or connected to ancestry in a more explicit way. I think it's always been a part of my work, but it's been more subtle and kind of distant and hidden, you know, the quest for belonging and home. And so this collection of sculptures are basically monuments or totems to honor my ancestors, you know, the people that I descend from. And it was created during my residency at Shangri-La. And so on one level, the simple geometric forms, the triangles, pairing of two planes, were partially inspired by Islamic architecture and the motifs in that courtyard, which is an Iranian kind of focused courtyard. Iranian-ish, you know. That particular space, most of the tile work is from Iran, from different periods in the country's history, or what's now called Iran, you know, was Persia. And so these sculptures connect to, but it's not just my Persian ancestors, it's all of them, you know, it's all of the people that I descend from. And if we zoom out 200,000 years, we all share the same ancestors. So it's sort of using the personal as a gateway to the universal. And I think Noguchi did that too in his own way. And so those pieces are for your ancestors too. And
maybe explain every one of them is a different material.
Exactly. So those 9 sculptures are some of the materials that our species has used throughout time. Ancient, marble, granite, basalt, wood, but also modern corten steel and plexiglass and aluminum. These are our material ancestors. But the source of all of these materials is still this planet, this ball of space, ball of stone in space. So I pay my respects to the materials as well as the people that got us to where we are today.
It's such an interesting thing. Something we talk about with Noguchi a lot, who is deeply ecological in terms of really being oriented towards the systems that connect everything on the earth. What's nice is that he wasn't some starry-eyed romantic about, I think in a way, loving nature or being an ecologist in some sense for some people means kind of ignoring humanity, writing humanity out of the story, because obviously we make quite a mess of things, or we can make quite a mess of things.
Yeah.
Noguchi was constantly trying to reinscribe us into the system of the planet, because obviously we are part of nature, and plexiglass is part of nature, even though it's engineered, even though these oil-based products that we've made some of the worst things ever invented, but nature's invented some pretty horrible things too, and through us some truly awful things.
Of course.
But his goal was to try to get all of that working together. It wasn't to pretend that large parts of the system don't exist. It was to get them truly integrated and to behave better as overall parts of the system.
Yeah.
And this piece feels that way because it's so open to the full range. It's not beauty first.
Yeah.
It's not, it feels very connected in a way that's true to, yes, Hawaii is spectacular, but there are a lot of falling down buildings and open, ugly lots and construction and the same things you get anywhere that humankind is.
The ways that we've marred the surface of this earth, or marked it, or built or destroyed, it's all just part of this process. And as you said, the connection of each of those materials to the planet, even if it's super processed, or not, very raw. And kind of going back to that, the prints from stone, it's the same process for me. It's sort of thinking about the way in which we use resources. We process this earth, we have to consume something, or otherwise we die. So as we consume, let's honor the things that we consume. Even if we're making plastic for our keyboards, for our computers, those computers are from nature. It's just very far removed from its source. So as we use those things, let's honor them and let's appreciate them. And maybe if we do that, like honoring the stone as I destroy it to make the print, there's a tension there. And I think it's kind of a tragic beauty. As I destroy the stone, it gives me something. And so let me focus and appreciate that. And what I do with the fragments after I'm done printing is I bury them. So it's sort of like the least I can do is return this thing to its source.
Recycling.
Yeah. So as we go through our life and interface with things, let's just remember where we get everything that we use.
And in some ways, we're not doing such a bad job of that. I mean, industry is trying to turn much more in the direction of, it's horrifying. You go to Starbucks and you get your cup of whatever, but that thing now is 80% post-consumer recycled, or maybe it's 100% post-consumer recycled. And, it has a chance to keep going back around and around on this merry-go-round, as opposed to the biggest island in the Pacific is the gyre of plastic spinning around in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean,
it's a man-made thing, not one of these hot spot islands that we're sitting on right now.
So it's a start. I do appreciate that. I think we're finally waking up a little bit, realizing, wow, we are connected to this place. Wow, we are this place, so let's be mindful about how we live and use it.
Well, let's talk
Yeah,
about the mindful, because there's a painting behind us. You do a lot of process-oriented mark making, but I think we probably have a slide too. I think it's the final
Maybe we
couple
can
of slides,
skip to
and
the
then
end.
we can go back.
Actually, can you hold this for a
Yeah.
second, please? Move this out of the way. All right. Sorry, actually, can we show the camera real quick? Thank you. So, all right, got it a little bit better there. So, what we have here is a mark. It's a single brush stroke. And this sort of connects to my interest in what I phrase it as economy of form. It's not economy in a financial sense, but it's paring things down, stripping away all that's unnecessary to get to the essence of something. And so, I think about, well, I can say this with 100 marks, but can I say it with a single mark? And oftentimes the answer is no, but I still see if I can do it. And it's again, paring things down. If there's one thing that I have to say, and I often use either not enough words or too many words to try and explain myself, but strip it all away. If there's one thing I want to say to the world, it's I'm here,
Right.
And that's what the mark says. It says I'm here with each mark, with each cut in the stone. I'm here, I'm here. And ultimately it's sort of we're here because 50% of the art happens when it's observed, right? And so that's the point of connection. And so each mark is also a point of connection to me. It's my way of reaching out into the world. And so with this brushstroke, it's a mindfulness practice. It's a meditation. It's being here now with each stroke, but also it's my human desire or need to leave my mark on this world. It's an immortality project in a way. And I think many artists endeavor to do something like that. And it's not so much like, oh, I want to live forever, I want everyone to know me, but it's just, I need to exist. And I need to create meaning in order to exist. Because if everything's meaningful, what's the point, So we can put it down.
Is it important, or is it that this is uniquely yours?
This
mark, yeah, this specific mark. It's not style. You're not trying to make these marks in a specific style.
I'm not trying to. I think they are made in a style because I'm making them.
Yeah.
But it's not an effort like, oh, this is going to be a Kamran Samimi mark, It's more of just,
Which is true of a lot of abstract art. The history of abstraction is trying to create essentially abstract signatures that are readily identifiable and become kinds of brands. Noguchi had a very cutting comment about abex painters and painting, which is just guys practicing their signatures, over and over and over again. But this isn't that. This is something else.
Right. This is more connected to, in a distant way, but it's like Zen calligraphy or philosophy. It's the enso, that moment of exhalation, meditation, forming that breath stroke. The kind of body of work that, sorry, now we can show that last slide, please. These paintings that we'll see, these are brush strokes back and forth, and these were actually created during COVID, incidentally. And they were about breath, and they were about being present and being mindful and expressing the fact that I'm alive, and that I have breath. Because at that time, so many people, COVID is a respiratory illness. So many people did not have breath and they were dying. And I did. And so it was sort of like, wow, this is a really difficult time for our world and for me, but at least I have my breath, and I'm going to just be here right now and appreciate that and let go of each breath. We can't hold our breath forever. We'll die. So we have to let go. And so each of those brushstrokes are that act of processing, letting go, appreciating. And also in that way, it's a kind of expression of my own mortality, my moments on this earth. But it's also kind of a visual, a silent prayer for those who, no longer live. And there's also a calligraphic aspect to it. There's in a very distant, to kind of go back to genealogies, in a very distant way, I think it connects to my frustration not being able to read or speak the languages of my ancestors. And Persian calligraphy is so beautiful. Even if you don't know what it says, it says something beyond the word, the human words, right? To me, it speaks of the unseen, the essence of things, the ways in which we're all connected to this planet, this universe, each other, the force that we have inside of us. And so each of these brushstrokes are kind of a celebration of that, which all humans, in whatever way we choose, a science or religion or whatever way we choose, there's something within us. And that's sort of my way of reaching out. And so it's my mark, it's I'm here, but again, it's you are here too. And through artwork, I think we're able to kind of connect and realize that we're not alone in this world,
Maybe, Candace, if we can go back to to emanation. There we go. I was really taken with images of you at the opening of the exhibition in the UAE, where this piece was a kind of a feature on a main wall, or a related one. Was it this exact piece, or was it a different?
It was a relative of this piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you thinking about, again, these images or these kind of figures or physical manifestations that you connect to that resonate more universally and can work in different cultural contexts. It was just very striking. What did it mean to show that there? And it's you, very striking. I've seen you're standing in the middle of a group of men who are in white robes, and trying to contextualize all the different places this could work and what it means in those different places, how it resonates in those different places. There's such a beauty in simple mark making or simple figure making, because it speaks many different languages, the way that music does.
Yeah. I mean, the mark it's universal, truly. And the first marks, the Lascaux hand paintings, basically they're saying, I'm here, and then that resonates throughout time. When we look at that, someone was there and we're here now and we're connected in that handprint. And in these marks, if we look at this piece on the screen, each of those layers of Japanese mulberry paper, those are marks. Those are brush strokes in space, the shadow and the liminal space between the sheets of paper. It's not just a stack of paper on the ground. The paper is wrinkled and then released to give it more presence, more body. But it's the space between which sculpts the material. If we think about sculptors, we sculpt material, but we also sculpt space. That's equally, if not more important. And so kind of going back to, it's not always what one paints. More often it's what one doesn't paint. It's what I don't sculpt, what I don't remove. And that takes more time is spent in the thinking and the contextualizing and it's not always about, I spent 1,000 hours making this painting. The painting actually might take a minute, but I might have spent 1,000 hours leading up to it, or 37 years. So this piece is sort of, it's a way of, again, marking in space. This piece is also, it was a visualization of time itself. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about, geologic time. We all know the effects of time, what time looks like when it's expressed, wrinkles in our face or wrinkles in the earth. But what does time itself look like? It doesn't look like anything. But this is a sketch, what might it look like if it had a form, and so for me, it might look something like this, it's this progression, it's this growth and decay, it's these layers which sort of merge and come off the surface of the wall. And so it's the spirit, it's visualizing the spirit of time. It's almost like a visual prayer to that spirit, and it's maybe something different for each one of us. But so that's one way I kind of explained or talked about that work in the context of the Islamic Art Festival in the UAE. Is all of my work on one level is a visual expression of prayer, and it's not a religious prayer, it's a personal prayer, but I believe it's a personal and universal prayer, and so each brushstroke, each mark in the stone, each layer of paper, it's all comes from that place.
Oh yeah, that's a good move. So talk about marking this stone, or these two stones.
Yeah, it's the same. It's just a different photo, but so the way that I approach stone, I think of my materials, they're not found objects. I don't stumble upon them. They're more like sought objects. It's almost when I see a stone on a hike buried in the dirt, it's like, oh, there you are. I've been looking for you. I've been waiting to meet you.
Do you go stone hunting specifically? We call it in Noguchi, we call it stone fishing, because that's what he called it. Because a lot of times they were coming out of rivers.
Yeah.
So, but we kind of use that phrase to refer to them more generally.
I mean, hunting has a negative connotation, but stone looking, observing, collecting, maybe. But I have to be very sensitive.
You are looking to them with the intent of chopping them up.
Not always.
So
not always. Sometimes it happens that way. But no, but a lot of the stones that I bring home, they never make it into sculptures. And the stone,
they might say they're already sculptures.
Well, that's exactly right.
They don't need your help.
They're finished.
Yeah.
They don't need anything. And there's always this silent asking of permission, which I need to do, because ultimately it's about honoring the material for me. It's not like, oh, I got to have this. I got to make a sculpture out of this. I see the stone, I touch it. Maybe I don't even touch it. I just see it. And it's this silent process of communication. It's like, are you okay coming home with me? Or do you want to stay where you put? And sometimes they do, and I don't disturb them. And other times it feels right. Like the stone gives me permission, But is the permission because you have a clear vision in your mind of what you could do with it? Sometimes, but not always. I mean,
it's just intuition.
It's this like silent communication without words, it's sort of, I guess on one level, any stone I could make a sculpture with, I shouldn't do that, but I could. So there's something else there that's like this, again, it's the communication, it's asking permission. Does this stone need to be changed? And oftentimes they don't. They want to stay as they are. And a lot of the stones that do give permission, they sit in my yard for years, and that may be their final place, or maybe I bring them back or put them somewhere else. And sometimes it feels right to take them a step further into the studio, and then they might sit there for a couple of years as I'm working on painting and carving wood. The stone's in the corner, and then at one point I look at it, and then it sort of connects to what I'm doing here, and it's like these brushstrokes might teach me how to cut that stone, and then the stone comes in, and then it's sort of worked with. And so it's this conversation that's happening all the time in my studio and even out of my studio. And again, the stone, in a way, it's this push and pull of, sometimes it's more like a wrestling match, my will versus the will of the stone. But it's also, I think it's a little more like a conversation or a cooperation.
The stone doesn't have a diamond chipped circular saw.
No,
it's not exactly a fair fight.
Well, yeah.
The stone that we were looking at is so interesting because it feels encoded. It almost feels like a kind of Rosetta Stone, that it's been cut with a form of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh-oh, our internet connection is
Uh-oh.
unstable. I'm not sure.
Got a little.
It is raining here. It's
Oh,
possible that
she said the rain messes up the.
the rain messes
Sorry,
up
let
the
me
internet.
see how this thing looks.
Do we have
So
a-
we have good signal. So let me just be. Sorry,
Candace?
everyone, if you can hear us.
Yeah, Candace, can you let us know? Are we still with you? Are you still with us?
See if I got a text from her.
Yeah, we don't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, you guys are back now.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have a storm, quick squall coming through. Candace, can you bring up the what is it called?
The reading
The
stone.
reading stone.
Sure.
I like that you picked up on that. That they encoded. You mentioned Rosetta Stone.
Yeah.
Again, it is kind of connecting to language, but it's that wordless language that is reminiscent of knowledge or wisdom or thoughts or expressions throughout time. And so those marks, those marks speak of the stone and speak of me and that cooperation, that connection. I guess hopefully the image will pop up.
Maybe it's being seen, but we're just having
Yeah.
a hard time seeing it.
Could be.
Candace said something at the very beginning that I wanted to go back to because I love the idea. We started talking about it too, about just nature and relationship to nature. And Noguchi loved, like, one of the things we talk about a lot. Right now we're here in Hawaii working on an exhibition for a wonderful Hawaii-based artist named Toshiko Takeezu, who is one of the great ceramists of the 20th century, anywhere in the world,
Yeah.
but happened to be from Hawaii, ended up in the East Coast of the United States. But she also worked like nature in a way because she worked iteratively in quantity over a long period of time. And the most amazing thing about nature is that life just does what it does. That famous line from Jurassic Park.
Oh yeah.
Life finds a way.
Yeah.
It just keeps doing. It's relentless and nonstop, and it's constantly churning. And that there's another way to look at what we think of as mindfulness, which is just being aware of the fact that that's how life works. It just keeps going, kind of no matter what happens. It's more and more and more. It's just constantly developing. And there's a relationship of that to kind of what we might call mindful practices, which are just much more connected to the doing and the being, which is as close as we get to just the living.
Yeah.
The way a plant might, or the way the weather does.
Right. Yeah. The tree doesn't think, oh, how tall am I going to grow up to be? Or...
Oh, I'm sorry. There seems to be a poor reception on Kamran and Dakin's part. If you don't mind holding, we'll try to reconnect them. Thank you.
Hi, we're sort of back.
Great.
Yeah,
We can
the
hear.
sun is out now, so maybe that's going to help.
We could hear you, but we can't see you yet. So hopefully that'll
still?
clear up in a little bit.
The connection must be really weak right now. But you can hear us. And,
Yes.
And you're broadcasting an image right now?
Yeah, well, okay, you guys are back. I was sharing screen, but I'll go ahead and let you continue.
So we were just talking about how working like nature in a way, being a little less, I'm not sure that consciousness was such a great boon to humanity.
Yeah.
Self-awareness. I mean, there's some great things about self-awareness, but there's some really bad things about it too.
I mean, most of the evil in the world comes from that, right?
Right, because it generates evil, I guess, is the easiest way to put it, simplest way to put it.
But it's also what makes everything that we create and existence, I think, meaningful. So it's that, it's the non-duality of it's this, but it's also this. It's both of those things.
Yeah.
And you can't have one without the other. So so there's the tension there, of course, but nature simultaneously destroys and creates, and it feels no remorse for the animals that it kills, but
or the ugly version of trees that it produces. I mean, we think about specimen trees. When you think about what an apple tree looks like, you're picturing a perfect specimen tree in a way, but there have been billions of other apple trees over time that don't fit that exact mode.
Yeah.
I mean, the beauty of nature is the iterative quality,
Yeah.
you know, just that it's constantly going and moving. That is a technology. You know, it's a spectacular technology.
Yeah.
It's one that Noguchi was really interested in. And I think process-based art making taps into more directly in a way that's really nice, that it's not about creating the individual masterpiece.
Right.
It's about feeling connected to and being connected to some next.
Hi, I'm sorry again. It looks like they lost connection. We'll just hang on a little bit until they log back in.
Hi.
Hey everyone. You can see some great stuff up here, but
maybe you know, we're close to an hour.
Yeah.
You know, do you want to see if there are any questions? Of course, we're happy to take questions.
Yes,
Other
everyone.
than why are you not here with us, which we would all prefer.
of course.
Oh, I'd love to be there as well. Thank you. Yeah, if any of you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat box. In the meantime, we have one more image to share. Maybe you guys can just conclude on that one, and then we can move on to our questions from the audience.
So we probably can't see the image, so let us know when it's displayed.
Okay.
And maybe tell us what it is.
Sure. It's the void stone 5.
Coring drill?
It's actually a water jet.
Yeah.
So which was really cool to use, because have you seen that process before?
Yes.
Yeah. It's using erosion, basically.
Very fast erosion.
Yeah, like what happens in 1,000 years is in 1 minute.
Yeah.
You know, which is just incredible. And there's little grain in the water too, so it's like abrasive, right? So
Noguchi stole almost everything that he knows about carving stone or knew about carving stone from the Uji River.
Oh yeah.
You know, because the Uji River is a water jet. It's not as fast, but it's fast moving water with silt dissolved in it. You know, so it's the perfect abrasive.
Yeah.
And the thing about the river is that it doesn't rush because it has all the time in the world.
Yeah.
You know, so in 1,000,000 years, it does very fine work, makes very smooth edges, very crisp, very clean. So you end up with an index of the flow of water in these stones. Which
it's a record of tides and flows and raging or
that's right.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
But you can simulate that in a way with a water jet.
In a different high-powered way. But that's one thing that I loved about making those cuts in stone. It was like, wow, even in this very expensive, fancy, modern machine, nature exists. And here it is, you know, this water and stone and erosion happening. And
it's just been very directed.
Yeah, in like one spot at a time. But those pieces ultimately became about, you know, what, again, my interest in kind of stripping away or removing what might be gained by the removal of something or the absence of it. And so in the case of the void is not like a hole where nothing exists. It's rather more in line with like the Zen idea of the void. It's not formlessness, but it's not form either. It's somewhere beyond that still. Infinite potential, you know? And for me, having these kind of overlaps of identity and fragments and connections to different places, the void is my placeless place. It's sort of that space where, again, I can exist and it can be everything. It's not this or it's not that. Identity for me is not one thing. I'm Iranian American, but I'm not just that. And we all have these facets, you know, and we have different ways to describe and explain them. But
is the void a fillable vessel?
I think it's constantly being filled, but it's infinite.
But it's not containing, it's flowing through.
Yeah, it's a passage through, which is limitless.
And is the
Yeah.
interior of that, is that gilded?
So in a way, it's gold leaf.
Yeah.
I went to Kanazawa several years ago, and they're really known for their traditional use of gold leaf. And so I kind of fell in love with that, and I got some leaves, brought it back with me. And it just seemed like the thing to do. The visual contrast between the black basalt, rough stone, and then the gilding, but also it was a way of emphasizing the spirit of the stone, almost anointing it, that passage through or that space within. You know?
I can't think of it. There's not a lot of gilt basalt on the planet.
Yeah.
That's a fairly unusual combination. How does gold leaf take on basalt?
It worked really well. I mean,
Because it has a lot of texture.
Well, the cut was pretty smooth because of the water jet, so it adhered really nicely. And that piece of basalt was not very porous, so yeah, it was a nice meeting. But I think it's also, to me, it's not absurd, but to use something like just common basalt stone they find on the ground and then pair it with the most precious metal that we know, gold. I love that, because it's like, why is this material so much more valuable than the common stone? I don't think it is, and when they're paired together, it's obvious, oh, they're not so different, but that's also a comment on like commodification and human history and rarity and all of that.
Odd constructed meanings.
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like we have some questions. I'll go ahead and share them. Let me stop this. So our first question we have from Lou says, I think being an outsider here in Hawaii gives you a unique opportunity to observe and absorb, which is an exciting adventure for an artist. Does Kamran feel that way?
Do I feel that it's a good opportunity to observe and absorb?
Being an outsider.
Oh, as an outsider.
Yes.
I guess
you want the opposite of that, don't you? You don't want to just be a remote observer.
Well, I don't think that I am. I hope. No, I'm not. I'm not a remote. I'm not looking in from the outside and like, ooh, look how beautiful this place is. I want to recreate it somehow. I'm in the place and I'm absorbing it, and it's coming out in my brushstrokes and in my cuts. And but I do think that because I have this fragmented, layered background,
hybridity is the concept that Noguchi.
Yeah, I always feel weird using that word because I'm not better because I'm mixed, but we all have different words, I guess I see things in a slightly different perspective. It's my perspective, and nothing is simple to me. And that's one reason why my work is visually quite simple, is because the world is so complicated. My inner turbulence is so layered and complex that my work has to balance that somehow. So I guess to answer your question, I mean, I do have my own perspective, and we all have our own perspective on looking at the same thing. And I bring that with me, and that is instilled in my work, whether it's implicit or explicit. It's an amalgamation of all of these experiences and memories and emotions and places and people that I've known.
But trying to be in them and inhabit them, not observe them from the outside. And
in that way, I am a vessel or a container or a site. I'm a site of all of those experiences, and you're a site, you're a landscape of everything that you've known. And
there's the Noguchi line. Very nicely done. I don't know how we can improve on that, but
that's it. We're done.
That was a beautifully paraphrased Noguchi line. That we are a landscape of all that we know.
More questions.
Okay.
Alexei asked a great question. Showing your work at Shangri-La and United Arab Emirates, your work has interacted with your Middle Eastern heritage in interesting ways. I'm curious if your Norwegian ancestry has been part of your work in any way.
I mean, the idea of ancestry, having a recognizable place in my work is one that I've often thought about, and it's difficult for me to kind of like put a finger on, oh, here's the Persian, and here's the Norwegian, and here's the Hawaii upbringing, because it's not so clear inside of me. It's a mixture. It's that storm that I was talking about. And that's one reason why abstraction is the way in which I work. It's abstraction it allows for that intermixing and that layering. And so to kind of, I'm not trying to avoid your question, but it's it's hard for me
by
to
the way. You can walk right around the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't point to the Norwegian or the Iranian or, but it's all there. And I think in a sense, the first paintings that we showed of stone and sea, part of that process, part of my process in creating those was thinking about ancestry and the nomadic people that carved their way through the desert and the mountains, the ancient Persians. As I shaped and sculpted the cement, I became those people on the surface of that canvas. And as I poured the water and the paint over the surface, I became the seafaring people that I also descend from, the Vikings and the Scandinavians, and the intimate connection they had with the ocean. And so, that's where it is, but you can't look at that and say, oh yeah, look at that, Viking ruins or anything, because it's so much more nebulous than that for me. So that's kind of that's my answer to you, but good question.
Great.
It is really lovely. That's what I was interested in about the exhibition in the UAE, because you take a body of work that's not explicitly that, and then you put it into a cultural context where it just resonates so appropriately, but so differently. Like that's a powerful experience, that displacement that feels like a fitting of pieces together as opposed to a taking apart.
Yeah. It is like a.
Hi, everyone. It looks like they dropped out again. Thanks for your patience as we deal with these connection issues. Kamran, I don't know if you guys are still on, but we can't hear you or see you anymore.
We're back.
You're back? Okay.
If you've given up on us, we completely
No, oh no, actually you guys look like you might be clear now. So
Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Yeah.
If you're still here.
okay.
Yeah, your comment about the work in the United Arab Emirates, kind of connecting to that region and that tradition. And those works, I had comments like, well, these are such a different take on the familiar motifs and patterns and things that we often see. Excuse me. And
Okay, Kamran and Dakin, we lost you again. Thank you everyone again for your patience. I think we'll wait one more minute, and if this continues, we can happily conclude. And thank you so much for your time in joining us today. Wait, maybe one more minute to see if they're able to log back on. And it's very much in the nature of our exhibition. Nature is making its way into our talk as well. Okay, well, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful day. And if you have a chance to be in San Francisco, make sure to check out the actual exhibition, NatureNature, in San Francisco.
hey, I think we're back.
Oh, okay.
Bye.
Yes.
I was just concluding it because
yeah,
I think I was just going to conclude it and thank everyone for their participation and for joining us this day. And for those of you who are in Hawaii, you can definitely check out Kamran's studio. If you're in San Francisco, check out NatureNature exhibition. If you guys want to say any final words about what your next steps are, what your next projects, and we'll just kind of wrap it up from there. Thank you so much.
This was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Candice. I'm sorry for the technical problems, but it's been really a joy to be up here and have a chance to chat with Kamran.
Thank you, Dakin, for working us into your trip here. And it's a real pleasure. And
Thank
of
you.
course, Candice, thank you for organizing. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and sticking with us for the difficulties. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it's really apropos that the exhibition is titled NatureNature. Nature makes its way into your talk as well. So it's actually perfect.
Nature gives us a sign. Okay, you guys are done.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. Come on. Thank you, Dakin. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.